It is somewhere past 2 in the morning, in the first week of December, in the year 1350, and the frost has been working on the valley since sundown. Picture the scene from above, the way an owl would see it. A river winding pale under starlight, water meadows stiff and white, a huddle of fish ponds like dropped coins, each one skinned with young ice. And rising out of the middle of it all, vast and dark and patient, a great Benedictine Abbey, its church as long as a cathedral, its tower holding up the winter sky, its precinct wall wrapping barns and orchards and gardens and dovecotes and workshops into one enclosed world. A small city of perhaps 60 souls, almost all of them, at this hour, asleep. Tonight, we are going to spend a whole year inside those walls. Not a year of battles or of kings, but a quiet year, a working year, the kind of year this house had already kept 200 times over and expected to keep 200 times more. We will follow the bells and the seasons, the bread and the candle wax, the monks and the novices and the lay brothers, from the dark of Advent all the way round the turning wheel of the liturgy. And you do not need to remember any of it. That is the first thing to say, and the most important. There will be no test, no thread to lose, no name you must keep hold of. The monks themselves would tell you that the whole point of their life is that it repeats, that nothing depends on your attention, that the hours will be sung whether anyone is listening or not. So settle in. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let your hands go loose wherever they are lying. If you drift off somewhere between the midnight bell and the spring planting, the Abbey will simply carry on without you, as it always has, and it will still be there, keeping its hours whenever you come back. For now, come down from the owl's height, over the precinct wall, across the frosted garth, and stand in the great court before the church. The cold here is absolute and clean. Smoke rises thin and straight from the kitchen chimney, where a banked fire keeps its embers under ash. Somewhere behind the stables, a dog shifts in its sleep. And then, into the stillness, comes the sound the whole valley sets its life by, the sound that has not failed in living memory. High in the tower, a bell begins to ring for matins. To understand what happens next, you have to go back a long way, because this house, like every Benedictine house in England, is living inside a book. Long before this abbey existed, long before England itself existed as a single kingdom, an Italian abbot named Benedict sat down, some 800 years before our December night, and wrote a short rule for monks. It is a modest document, plain and practical, more concerned with kitchen rotas and the proper amount of wine than with visions or wonders. It says that idleness is the enemy of the soul. It says the monk's day should be divided between prayer, reading, and the work of his hands. And above all, it says that nothing is to be preferred to the work of God, by which Benedict meant the singing of the daily offices, the 8 services of psalms and prayers that rise like a scaffold through every single day. From the black hours before dawn to the last candle-lit prayers of the evening. 8 times a day, every day, forever, that rule crossed the sea into England with missionary monks, took root, was ruined by one wave of invasions and replanted after another, and by the time our abbey was founded, some 2 centuries before tonight, it was simply the shape a serious religious life took. A local magnate gave the land, part piety and part insurance for his soul. The first monks arrived from an older mother house with a cartload of books and vestments and began by building in timber. Then came masons and quarries and decade after decade of slow stone, until the church you are standing beside had swallowed the labor of 3 generations. The house grew rich the way monasteries did, by gift and legacy and careful management, until it held manors and granges scattered across half the county, flocks of sheep in their thousands, mills and fisheries and rents, and the abbot of this house sat among the great men of the shire. All of that, the whole estate, the whole machine, exists to protect the thing that is about to happen in the dark, which is a line of tired men singing psalms. The bell goes on ringing, unhurried. In the dorter, the long dormitory range on the east side of the cloister, the monks are rising. They have been asleep since about 7 the previous evening, fully clothed in their habits, each man on a straw mattress under woolen blankets in his own low partition, boots by the bed. There is no scramble. The rule allows time, and winter teaches patience. One by one they descend the night stair, a stone staircase built directly from the dormitory down into the south transept of the church, so that a monk can go from his bed to his prayers without ever stepping into the open cold. A single lantern burns at the stair foot. In the choir, the 2 long-facing rows of oak stalls, wax candles have been lit by the sacrist servant. Just enough of them to read by, little warm islands in an enormous darkness, for the church at night is less a room than a roofed-over piece of the night itself. Its vault too high for any candle to find, its aisles running off into blackness, its windows faint gray ghosts. The monks file into their stalls in order of seniority, hoods up, hands tucked into sleeves, their breath showing. Somewhere near the back, the novices stand with their master, the youngest of them swaying slightly 16 years old and still learning how to be awake at this hour. And then Matins begins, and this is the sound the whole institution exists to make. A single senior voice opens, asking the Lord to open his lips. The choir answers, and then the psalms start to flow, chanted back and forth between the 2 sides of the choir. 1 verse from the left, 1 verse from the right. A long, level, tidal sound, unaccompanied, unhurried, with a pause held in the middle of every verse like a breath. On a winter night the office is long, a dozen psalms and more, with lessons read aloud between them. A monk standing at the great lectern, reading slowly from the scriptures or the church fathers, while the rest sit listening in their stalls. And if a listener sinks a little way toward sleep inside that sound, nobody thinks any less of him. Though a senior monk called the circuiter walks softly along the stalls with a small lantern, precisely to touch the shoulder of any brother who is gone all day. Way under. The singing goes on for the better part of 2 hours. There is nothing to watch. There is nothing to follow. It is out of your hands, all of it, and that is exactly what it is for. When Matins ends, the monks do not leave. They wait in the dark, and as the very first gray comes into the east windows, they stand again and sing lauds, the praise office of daybreak, shorter and brighter. And then, at last, they climb back up the night stair and lie down again for a little more sleep, because the rule is old and human and knows exactly how much a man can bear in December. While they sleep, the Abbey wakes from below. The kitchen fire is unbanked and fed. The bakehouse, which has been warm all night, slides its first loaves out on long wooden peels. Coarse dark bread for the servants, and the poor, finer wheaten loaves for the community. In the brew house next door the mash is steaming, for this house drinks ale the way every English house drinks ale, at every meal, brewed thick and mild in quantities that would astonish you, gallon upon gallon a day, because the river water is honest enough, but the ale is safer and warmer, and the rule allows it. Lay servants move through the courts with firewood and buckets. The abbey does not run on monks alone and never has. For every man in choir there is at least one man in an apron, cooks and bakers and brewers and grooms and carters and laundry hands, hired men from the villages round about, who hear the offices only as weather, a sound that is always there. At about 7 the bell rings again, and the monks rise for good. They wash at the lavatorium, a long stone trough in the cloister walk, where water runs from a row of bronze spouts, piped in lead all the way from a spring on the hillside. For this house, like most great abbeys, has plumbing that the towns will not match for centuries. Fresh water in, foul water out, flushed away down stone drains to the river. Washed, they go into the church for prime, the first of the little day offices, short and plain. Then comes the morrow mass, a quiet early mass, and then one of the hinges of the monastic day, which is not a service at all. The whole community files into the chapter house, an octagonal stone room off the east cloister walk, ribbed like the inside of a shell, with a bench running round the wall. Here, every single morning, the abbey governs itself. A chapter of the rule of St. Benedict is read aloud, which is why the room is called the chapter house. The obituaries are read, the names of dead brothers and dead benefactors whose anniversaries fall today, and the community prays briefly for each. The business of the estate is announced, a roof to be mended, a plow team to be bought, a lawsuit inching forward. And then comes the part the novices dread, the chapter of faults, when any monk who has broken the small law of the house, spilled the milk, dozed at matins, spoken in the cloister when he should have kept silence, kneels in the middle of the floor and accuses himself, and receives from the abbot or prior some small penance, a psalm to recite, a meal taken sitting on the floor. It sounds severe, and sometimes it is, but mostly it is housekeeping for the soul. A daily emptying out of the small grievances that make shared lives curdle, and the old monks treat it with the calm of men who have knelt on that floor 1,000 times and lived. After chapter, the community disperses to its work, and the abbey shows you its other face, because this is not only a church with a dormitory attached. It is one of the great economic engines of the county, and it is run, department, by monks who are effectively managers, each one called an obedientiary, each holding his obedience, his assigned charge, from the abbot. The cellarer is the greatest of them, the quartermaster of the whole house, responsible for food and drink and fuel and carts and the servants' wages. A man who spends more time with tally sticks and account rolls than with psalters, riding out to the granges, arguing about the price of herring, worrying about how many quarters of wheat remain in the granary and how deep the winter will bite. The sacrist keeps the church itself, its vestments and plate, its lamps, and above all its candles, and we will come back to candles. Because at this end of the year, the sacrist is the busiest man in the precinct. The precentor rules the choir and the library, choosing the music, correcting the books, keeping the great service volumes in repair. The infirmarian keeps the infirmary, a separate hall east of the cloister with its own chapel and kitchen, where the sick lie warm, where the old monks who can no longer stand the night office live out their years, and where the whole community comes by turns for the periodic bloodletting that medieval medicine holds to be essential. The almoner faces outward, keeping the almonry by the great gate, where the poor of the district gather daily for bread and broken meats and worn-out clothing. The kitchener and the refectorian run the meals, The chamberlain finds every monk his habit and boots and bedding. The guest master keeps the guest hall ready for travelers. For a Benedictine house is bound by its rule to receive every guest as if he were Christ himself. And a great abbey on a good road is half a hotel at all times. Novice master, granger, keeper of the fish ponds, master of the works. Under and around them all move the lay brothers, men in modified habits who took simpler vows and do the heavy outdoor work, though there are fewer of them than there were in the old days, and out on the distant granges, the Abbey's great outlying farms, hired bailiffs and plowmen, now do much of what lay brothers once did. The world has passed through hard years lately, and the house is smaller than it was a generation ago, and it does not speak of that much, and we will not either. The frame holds, the hours are kept. Through the morning, the offices keep arriving like a slow heartbeat. Terse, brief, mid-morning, then the high mass of the day, sung at the great altar with incense and full ceremony. The daily summit of the house's worship. Then sext at midday. Between them, the monks not tied to an obedience are in the cloister, and the cloister in December is a test of vocation. It is a square covered walk around an open green garth, glazed only here and there, open to the air, and the monks sit at their reading in shallow recesses called carrels, each man with a book on a sloping desk. Wrapped in his cowl, sometimes with a pierced metal ball full of hot coals to warm his fingers. Reading in this world is work. The rule commands it. Books are copied here too, in the carrels and in a warmer writing room, for the Abbey keeps a scriptorium, and a trained scribe with a quiet hand is one of the treasures of the house. He works with quill and oak gall ink on parchment made from the skins of the Abbey's own calves, ruling his lines with a stylus. Copying a psalter or a chronicle or a book of accounts one patient letter at a time, and in deep winter he is allowed to stop when his fingers can no longer be trusted, because a shaking hand ruins a page that a week of work went into. On the coldest days the ink itself goes thick and sullen, and the precentor rations out the best places nearest the light. At about 2:30 in the afternoon, after none, the 9th hour office, comes the one meal of the winter day, and it is worth slowing down for, because everything about it is deliberate. This is Advent, a fasting season, so there is one meal only, taken in the freighter, the great refectory on the south side of the cloister, a hall as tall as a church with a pulpit built into its wall. The monks wash their hands at the trough, file in, and stand at the long tables while grace is sung. Then they sit and they eat in complete silence, and into that silence a single voice reads aloud from the pulpit, a life of a saint, a passage of Scripture, on and on in a level chant while the dishes go round. No flesh meat is served in the freighter. And in Advent the kitchen leans on fish and vegetables, a thick pottage of peas or beans grown in the Abbey's own gardens, bread in generous weight, salted herring bought by the barrel from the coast, eels and pike and brame from the Abbey's own ponds, cheese and ale. Because no one may speak, the monks talk with their hands, using the house's inherited sign language. A vocabulary of 100 small gestures. A monk who wants bread makes a circle with his thumbs and forefingers. For fish, he waggles his hand sideways like a tail swimming. For cheese, he presses his palms flat together like a man pressing curds. The signs are ancient and slightly absurd, and every novice giggles at them once, exactly once, under the novice master's eye. After the meal there is a little time, and then the day is already folding, because December light fails early. Vespers is sung as dusk fills the church, the great evening office, candles again against the coming dark. Supper does not exist in winter, though the community gathers in the evening for a hot spiced drink and a short reading called the collation. Then, Compline, the last office, sung almost from memory in near darkness, ending with the prayer that asks for a quiet night and a perfect end. And then the great silence begins, the total silence that holds the house until morning, and the monks climb the day stair to the dorter, and by about 7 they are asleep, and the Abbey has completed one more day. One bead on a string of tens of thousands, and the frost tightens on the fish ponds, and the bell waits in the tower for 2 in the morning. That is the skeleton, and it never changes. Summer will stretch it, and feast days will decorate it, but from now until the end of our year, whatever else is happening, that frame of 8 offices is standing under it. You can stop tracking it now. It will simply be there, the way a heartbeat is. Hold the picture of the novices for a moment, because it is December, and December belongs to beginners. This house takes in boys and young men mostly in their middle teens, some given by their families with a gift to the house, some come of their own asking, a merchant's son, a knight's younger boy with no land coming to him, a bright village lad spotted by the Almery school. For a year and often longer they are novices, not yet monks, and they live under the novice master, an experienced, patient, unshockable monk whose whole obedience is the making of new brothers. They sleep in their own corner of the dorter, sit in their own low place in choir, and spend their days learning the trade. And it is a trade. They must learn the Psalter by heart, all 150 psalms, because a choir monk sings the whole Psalter every week of his life and cannot be forever squinting at a book in the dark. They learn to chant the 8 tones, how to breathe in the middle of a verse, how to hold a pause. They learn Latin grammar if they came without it, letters if they came without those. They learn the sign language, the order of processions, how to bow, when to kneel, how to hold their hands, how to walk in the cloister, which is to say slowly. They are allowed more sleep than the professed monks, and more food and a little play, for the rule is gentler with the young than its reputation suggests. Somewhere in the year ahead, each of them will kneel in the chapter house and make his profession, promising stability, fidelity to the monastic way, and obedience, and the community will sing over him, and he will be clothed in the full habit, and from that day the house is his home until he dies, and his grave is already certain out in the monk cemetery east of the church, under the same grass as 2 centuries of his predecessors. To a modern ear that can sound like a door closing. To many of them it felt like the opposite, like a door finally shut against the wind. Advent deepens around all of this. The word means arrival, and the season is a long, dark leaning forward, 4 weeks of waiting for Christmas, kept with fasting and with a particular somber music. The church is stripped plain. The great alleluias are set aside. The lessons at matins fill with prophecy, with the watchmen on the walls, with the people who walked in darkness. On the feast of St. Lucy, in the middle of the month, when the nights are at their very longest, the choir sings of light, on the principle, old as the hills, that you sing of a thing hardest when you have least of it. And in the last week before Christmas, the house comes to the 7 great O antiphons, one each evening at vespers, each one beginning with that long round vowel, O wisdom, O root, O key, O dayspring, each one sung before and after the Magnificat while the choir stands in candlelight, and by ancient custom the greater officers of the house each take one, the abbot beginning. And on the evening, a given officer sings his "Oh, he stands the community" a small treat from his own funds, a pittance, an extra dish, or a better wine, so that the darkest week of the year becomes, inside these walls, a slow crescendo of both music and supper. The monks would deny that this is charming. It is entirely charming. Christmas Eve arrives with the whole precinct scoured and ready. The church has been cleaned end to end, the best vestments taken out of their chests, cloth of gold stiff as boards, and the sacrist has been hoarding wax for weeks. On this night, the timetable itself bends. The community goes to bed early and rises not at 2, but toward midnight, and Matins of Christmas is the longest and most splendid night office of the year. Its lessons sung to elaborate music, the church ablaze with easily 10 times its ordinary candlelight, no small thing when every flame is money. And at its end, in the very dead of the night, the first Mass of Christmas is sung, the Mass of the Angels, so that the moment of the Nativity is met awake, in choir, in the dark, by the whole house standing together. There is a second Mass at dawn and a third, the great one, in full daylight. 3 Masses where every other day has one, and the bells between them rolling out across the frozen valley to the villages, who are keeping their own Christmas in the parish churches and who like to hear the Abbey thunder. And then, because these are human beings in December, there is dinner. The fast of Advent ends, and the freighter sees the best meal of the winter. The cellarer has been planning it since autumn. There is flesh meat now, for those who may take it, served in the misericord, the room of mercy set aside for meat days. For by our year, the old absolute rule against flesh has softened into an elaborate system of rotations that lets a monk keep the letter of the law in the freighter and eat roast pork next door on the right days, and the community rotates through with the ease of long practice. There are pittances stacked on pittances, extra dishes given in memory of dead benefactors who left money for exactly this purpose, so that a night dead 100 years buys the monks their spiced wine tonight and is prayed for by name in return, which both sides considered a fair bargain. The reading in the pulpit continues, because it always continues. But the reader has been chosen kindly, and the passage is short. Through the 12 days that follow, the house stays lit and fed. On the feast of the Holy Innocents, the novices and the almonry boys are given a day of licensed cheek, one of them raised up as a little boy bishop to preside in mock solemnity, an old custom the seniors pretend to disapprove of and quietly enjoy. On the octave the year turns, though the house hardly marks the number, for the Abbey's own year turns on feasts, not on figures. And on the 6th of January, Epiphany, the season crests one last time, the star, the 3 kings, the gifts, gold heavy in the vestments, and then the decorations of the Spirit are folded away, and the Abbey settles into the long, flat cold of deep winter. January inside the precinct is a month of small economies and small mercies. The one legal fire for the community burns in the warming house, the calefactory, a room off the cloister where a great hearth is kept alight through the cold months, and the monks are allowed in at set times to stand in thaw, hands spread, saying little, steam rising gently from wet wool, an experience any one of us would recognize across 7 centuries. The infirmary is fuller than usual, old chests rattling in the cold, and the infirmarian moves down his row of beds with syrups of horehound and hyssop from his own herb garden, and the old monks who live there permanently are indulged with fires and better food and shorter prayers, the rule having always known that mercy is not elapse. In the ordinary way of things, each able monk also goes to the infirmary a few times a year for his bloodletting, the seni, a procedure medicine then thought cleansing, and whatever the medicine was worth, the custom around it was shrewd, for the bled monk got several days of rest, meat, extra sleep, and permission to miss the night office. So that the infirmary in a bleeding week has something of the air of men on a small, quiet holiday, and abbots down the centuries grumbled that some brothers seemed remarkably eager for the lancet. Outside, the work narrows but never stops. The keeper of the ponds breaks the ice at the sluices and nets what the kitchen needs from the stews, the smaller holding ponds where fish fatten within reach. The granger watches his mounded grain for damp and rats. Carts still come in from the granges, timber and hay and sacks, the carters stamping in the great court, and the smith's fire in the outer court never goes cold, there being always a plowshare to mend before spring. At the gate, the almoner's queue is longest now, for January is the hungry hinge of the year in every village. And the Abbey's daily dole of loaves and pottage is, for some of the people standing in that line, the difference that keeps them until spring. The rule would say that this, as much as the singing, is the work of God, and on a hard morning the almoner counting loaves against faces might permit himself to think that his obedience was the plainest arithmetic in the house. And through all of it, in his workshop against the church wall, the sacrist is making candles, because the year's first great feast is coming, and it is made of light. Wax has been arriving for weeks from the Abbey's own hives and bought besides pale blocks of it, and the sacrist and his servants melt and skim it and dip the long wicks over and over, patient as icicles forming. Each pass, adding one thin coat, racks upon racks of tapers hardening in the cold air, tall ones for the altar, stout ones for the processions, small ones by the hundred. The smell of warm beeswax hangs about the south transept for days, honey and smoke together, one of the kindest smells the medieval world has to offer, and the novices find reasons to walk past. Then it is the 2nd of February, 40 days after Christmas, and the feast the whole English world calls Candlemas. In the liturgy it is the Purification, the day the infant Christ was carried into the temple, and an old man named Simeon, who had been promised he would not die before he saw the light of the world, took the child in his arms and said that now he could depart in peace. For his eyes had seen a light to lighten the Gentiles. And so, on this day, the Church blesses light itself. Before the High Mass, the whole community gathers, and the year's supply of candles is heaped and blessed with prayer and incense, and every monk, every novice, every servant who can be spared, and the guests from the hall, and folk come in from round about, each receives a lit candle, and the whole assembly moves in procession through the great dark church, singing Simeon's song. A river of small flames flowing up the nave, past the pillars 200 years old, every face in the crowd lit from below, warm and calm, the whole house carrying its light in its hands. Outside the valley is still hard with frost, and the ponds are still gray, and winter is far from done. But the light has turned. The monks can feel it at Vespers, which is no longer sung in full dark. Simeon's song is a bedtime song when you listen to it, an old man saying that it is all right now, that he has seen what he stayed awake to see, that he can let go and rest. The monks sing it every single night of their lives, at Compline, at the very edge of sleep, and tonight they sing it in procession with the flames in their hands, and then the candles are quenched one by one, and put carefully away for the year's use, and the Abbey folds itself down once more into the long quiet of a winter evening. The frost settling, the embers banked, the bell resting in the tower, everything in its place, everything held, everything kept. The house is deep in Lent now, and it is settled into the fast the way a body settles into a long and familiar road. The ash that was signed onto every forehead at the start of the season wore away weeks ago, but the mark of the fast is on everything else instead. It is on the table, on the choir, on the light itself. It is early in March, and the great Abbey church stands in the gray hour before dawn, with its towers dark against a sky that is only just beginning to think about morning. Within the walls, some 60 men are living one of the most carefully ordered lives in England, and they are living it now in its most pared and quiet form. Nothing about Lent in this house is dramatic. It is the same great wheel, turned a little more slowly, carrying a little less weight, and the men inside it have kept this fast so many times that their bodies know it better than their minds do. The night office comes first, as it always does. Somewhere past the middle of the night, the bell sounds in the dormitory, and the monks rise from their straw mattresses in the long upper room, feel for their night shoes, and file down the worn stone of the night stairs into the church. In Lent, the Psalms of Matins seem longer, and perhaps they are, but the men do not measure them. They stand in the carved wooden stalls in their black habits with their hoods raised against the cold, and the two halves of the choir answer one another back and forth across the dark, verse after verse, the way the tide answers the shore. A few candles burn on iron stands. The rest of the great building is simply darkness, pillars going up into it and vanishing, and the voices moving in the middle of it like a small warm current in a very large sea. You do not need to keep count of the psalms any more than they do. The office ends, the monks return up the stairs, and the house sleeps again for a little while in the deepest part of the night. What has changed with the season is the shape of the day that follows. Through Lent, the whole community eats once, and only once, and that single meal comes late, in the middle of the afternoon after the office of Vespers has been sung. Because the rule will not let the meal come before the evening office, the cellarer and the prior have done what monks have always done, which is to move Vespers itself gently earlier, so that the fast is kept in its fullness and the men are still fed while there is daylight to eat by. It is a small, practical mercy, folded inside an old obedience, and the house is full of arrangements like it. The fast is real. The hunger by mid-afternoon is real. But nobody here is asked to be a hero, only to be steady, and steadiness is the one thing this life produces in abundance. The single meal itself is the cellarer's winter-long problem and his quiet pride. He is the officer who feeds the house, the keeper of the granaries and the cellars and the storerooms under the West Range, and in Lent his kitchen serves no flesh meat at all, not even in the misericord where the older and weaker brothers are usually allowed a gentler table. What his kitchen serves is fish and bread and pottage, and it serves them with more variety than you might expect. There are barrels of salted herring bought by the hundred from the autumn fairs and carted inland smelling of brine and smoke. There is stockfish, wind-dried cod as hard as board, which the kitchen servants soak in the fish-house troughs for a day and a night, and then beat soft with wooden mallets before it goes anywhere near a pot. There are dried peas and beans that become thick pottages flavored with leeks and onions from the garden. There is almond milk, made by pounding almonds in a mortar and steeping them in water, a pale, faintly sweet liquid that Lenten cooking leans on the way ordinary cooking leans on butter, because milk and eggs are put away with the meat. And on Sundays and feast days there is fresh fish, and the fresh fish is the Abbey's own. Down past the rear redorter and the orchard wall, on the low ground where a leat drawn off the river runs through a line of hazels, lie the fish ponds, the stews, 3 of them stepped one below another with sluices of oak between. They are the fish keeper's little kingdom. All year he tends them, netting the fry, moving fish from pond to pond as they grow, cutting the weed, mending the clay banks where the Morans dig, and in Lent his work becomes the center of the house's table. On the mornings before a fish day, he and a couple of the Abbey servants wade out with a long net, the water still cold enough to ache, and draw it slowly toward the bank. And the pond gathers itself into a heaving silver weight of brame and roach and eels, with now and then a pike lying long and still among them like a stick of gray wood. The best go into the holding, stew by the kitchen, where they swim until the kitchener wants them. The eels come up from the river weirs too, taken in woven willow traps, set overnight in the race. And there are few things the medieval kitchen values more, for an eel is rich where almost everything else in Lent is plain. On the feast of the Annunciation, which falls near the end of March and shines in the middle of the fast like a coin in a furrow, the pittenser will pay for a dish of pike for the whole community, and the house will eat it gratefully and go back to its herring the next day without complaint. In the church, Lent has its own furniture. On the first Monday of the fast, the sacrist and his men hung the great Lenten veil across the chancel, a wide curtain of plain unbleached linen drawn between the choir and the high altar, so that for 40 days the monks sing toward a wall of pale cloth, and the most sacred thing in the house does its work half hidden, like the year itself, which is all bare fields and buried seed. The vestments have gone over to sober colors, the joyful word that the choir sets aside every year before the fast was set aside on time, locked away with the season's other brightness. And the chant runs graver without it. None of this is mourning, exactly, the sacrist would tell you, if he were a man of many words, which he is not, that the church is simply keeping the season the way the fields keep it, stripped and waiting, and that everything now hidden will be given back at Easter with interest. Lent is also, by the oldest custom of the order, the season of books. The rule of St. Benedict, which this house has followed for as long as anyone can trace, directs that at the beginning of Lent each monk shall receive a book from the library and read it straight through, entire and in order. So, in the first week of the fast, the precentor, who keeps the Abbey's books as the cellarer keeps its barley, laid the volumes out in the chapter house. And each brother came forward in turn and took the one appointed to him. A psalter with commentary for one, the letters of St. Jerome for another, a life of St. Cuthbert, a book of homilies, the Moralia of Gregory for a strong reader with a long Lent ahead of him. Each man's book is written against his name on the precentor's roll, and he will answer for it in a year's time. And so on these lengthening mornings, in the hour set aside for reading, the north walk of the cloister fills with quiet men and open books, each one moving his lips slightly as he reads, for reading here is a murmured thing, half voice and half breath, and a cloister full of readers sounds like a hive settling for the night. The north walk is the scriptorium's country. The carols stand in a row against the inner wall, little wooden studies hardly wider than the desk inside them, each with its bench and its sloped board set to catch the best of the southern light as it comes over the garth. Through the winter, a man could write here for only a few hours in the middle of the day before his ink chilled and his fingers went stupid with cold. Now the light comes earlier and stays later, and the copyists feel the year turning in their hands. One brother is far into a great antiphonor for the choir, ruling his lines with a dry point of lead, pricking the margins with a wheel, laying the black square notes onto their 4 red lines one by one, patient as a man setting tiles. Another grinds oak galls with green vitriol and gum to make the iron-black ink that outlasts the men who use it. Another has charge of the colors, the vermilion and the azure, and the little cushioned book of gold leaf, so light that a held breath will fold it, and he waits for a still afternoon before he dares to lay it. The parchment itself is the Abbey's own, skins from its own flocks, limed and scraped and stretched on frames in the yard behind the kitchen until they are as pale and taut as a drumhead. When a skin is scraped, there is a sound like a long, soft sigh, over and over, and it is one of the sounds of spring here, along with the first blackbird in the garth and the creak of the well wheel. Beyond the walls, on the Abbey's farms, the year's real labor has begun. The household's granges scattered across the vale, each one a working farmstead with its barns and byres and dovecote, run by lay brothers and hired hands under the cellarer's eye. The lay brothers are monks of a plainer kind, men who took vows of obedience, but not the choir's burden of Latin. Bearded where the choir monks are shaven, and their office is work. Now, in the drying days of March, the ox teams are out on the grange fields from first light, 8 beasts to a plow on the heavy land, and the plowman leans on the stilts while a boy walks at the head of the team, and the furrows come over dark and glistening behind them. And the gulls walk in the new furrows like white-robed inspectors. After the plow come the harrows, and after the harrows the sowers, each man with his seed-lip slung at his hip, casting the oats and the barley broadside with a swing that has not changed in 1,000 years. One stride, one cast, one stride, one cast, up the field and down again. Peas and beans go into their own ground, dropped into holes made with a dibble, and the field women follow the sowers with clappers to keep the rooks and pigeons honest. In the folds on the higher ground the lambing is at its height, and the shepherds sleep out in wheeled huts among their ewes, and on a cold, clear night the whole hillside is a low conversation of ewes and lambs finding one another over and over in the dark. The Abbey's own garden, inside the walls, is waking too. The gardener and his boys have dug the beds along the south-facing wall and set the first leeks and onions and colewort, and sown the parsley and the pot herbs, and pruned the apple trees in the orchard so that the March wind goes through them cleanly. The infirmarian walks the physic beds at the garden's end at least once a day, noting what the winter has spared. The sage and rue and hyssop coming green at the root, the fennel spearing up, the poppies self-sown along the path edge. His little kingdom is the infirmary hall on the east side of the cloister, warm, quiet, and smelling of herbs, where the old monks who can no longer stand the night office live out their gentler rule, and where, several times a year, outside the fast, the healthy come by turns for their bleeding, a few brothers at a time, and afterwards sit by the infirmary fire for 3 easy days with better food and no night office, which is as close to a holiday as this life allows. Even in Lent the infirmarian keeps his stores ready, the dried betony and the horehound syrup and the honey, because coughs do not keep the fast. And every day, fast or feast, there are the poor at the gate. The almoner is the officer whose whole work is the broken meats and the worn cloaks and the daily dole, and Lent is his season the way it is the fish keeper's. Each day at the appointed hour, the poor of the neighborhood gather at the almonry by the great gate. And each day they are fed from the house's own bread and ale and from whatever the kitchen can spare, and the almoner knows most of them by name, the widows, the old plowmen with ruined backs, the wandering men making for the shrines. The rule says that the guest and the poor man are to be received as Christ himself, and whatever else a great abbey may forget, this house does not forget that. Least of all now, with Easter coming and the greatest of the almoner's days ahead of him, for the fast is turning. 2 weeks before Easter the season deepens into Passiontide, and the sacrist goes round the church with his men and veils what is left to veil, the crosses, the images, the reliquaries, every bright and holy thing hooded in cloth, so that the building itself seems to have drawn its hood up like the monks in the night choir. The light is growing daily, the evenings are pale and long, the pear blossom is opening white along the orchard wall, and inside the church everything is muffled and waiting, and the two movements together, the world brightening and the church stilling, make these 2 weeks feel like held breath, though nothing in them hurries. Then comes Palm Sunday, and the week that the whole year bends toward. On that morning, the community blesses branches, not true palms, which no one here has ever seen growing, but salal with its silver catkins, and yew and box, and with these in their hands the monks and the abbey servants and the folk of the parish go out in procession, out of the church. Around the great court, the shrine borne ahead, under a canopy, the choir singing the anthems of the day, boys' voices answering from the gate tower as the procession passes beneath. At the church door the procession halts and then enters, as the choir takes up the hymn of the King who comes in meekness, and within, at the high mass, the deacons sing the long account of the Passion straight through. One voice for the narrator, one for the crowd, one deeper and slower for the words of Christ, and the community stands listening to a story every man of them knows by heart and hears every year of his life, and which has not yet grown old for any of them. The days that follow have their own names and their own weight, and the house moves through them hour by hour as it was built to do. On the last 3 nights of the week, the office is sung in a church that is darker than usual even for this house of darkness. A great triangular stand of candles is set before the choir, and as the psalms of the night office go by, a candle is put out at the end of each, one by one, the light withdrawing step by step as the singing goes on, until at the last there is a single flame left burning. And that one is carried away behind the altar and hidden, and the office ends in true dark, with one soft thunder of closing books like a door shut far away, and the monks go up the night stairs by feel. If you drift toward sleep somewhere in these nights, let it be so. The candles will go out one by one just the same, and the hidden flame will be brought back just the same. And none of it needs your watching. On the Thursday, the house turns from the choir to the towel. This is the day of the Maundy, the day of the commandment to love, and by ancient custom, the community serves the poor with its own hands. The almoner has chosen the men, as many poor men as there are monks in the house, old plowmen and roadmen and half-blind pensioners of the gate, and they are brought into the cloister and seated along the benches of the south walk, some of them shy in that quiet place, some of them at ease, for a few have been chosen every year for a decade. Then the abbot himself, with the prior and the seniors behind him, kneels down before them with basin and ewer and towel, and washes their feet and dries them. And each monk kneels likewise before a poor man, and does the same, and each guest is given bread and ale and a silver penny from the abbot's own hand. In the evening the community keeps its own maundy, the brothers washing one another's feet in turn, and afterward there is a loving cup, a single shared drink taken standing, and then, at the day's end, the altars of the church are stripped bare, every cloth and ornament carried away, the choir singing quietly the while, until the great building stands as plain as a barn. And the house goes to bed in a church made ready for the starkest day of its year. Good Friday here is the stillest day of the fast, and the house keeps it barefoot. There is no Mass on this day, the only day of the year without one. The community comes into the bare choir, and the long liturgy of the day unfolds slowly, the prophecies, the prayers, offered one by one for the whole world. For the church, for the king, for travelers and prisoners and the sick, and then the veiled cross is brought out and uncovered in 3 stages, lifted a little higher each time as the choir answers, and set before the steps of the altar on a cushion. And then, from the abbot down to the youngest professed, every man in the house comes to it slowly on his knees over the cold pavement, without shoes, without haste, each in his turn, and kisses the wood. The monks call this creeping to the cross, and the folk of the parish do it in their own churches on the same morning, the whole of England on its knees at once, shuffling forward a hand's breadth at a time toward something it loves. When all have crept, the cross, wrapped now in linen, is carried with candles to a recess on the north side of the presbytery, a little arched chamber the masons made for exactly this, the sepulchre, and there it is laid within, together with the consecrated bread reserved from the day before, and the opening is closed with a sealed cloth, and lights are set to burn before it. From this hour until Easter morning, the sepulchre is watched. 2 monks at a time keep the vigil, relieved through the days and nights the way sentries would be, kneeling in the candlelight beside the little sealed recess while the rest of the house sleeps or sings elsewhere. And there are men in this community who count those watch hours deep in the night between Friday and Sunday among the sweetest of their whole lives. Holy Saturday belongs to fire and water. In the morning the community gathers, and every lamp and candle in the great church is put out, until the whole vast building holds not one point of flame, a thing that happens on no other day. Outside the door the new fire is struck, sparks from flint into tinder, coaxed into a small brave blaze and blessed, and from this one new fire a taper is lit, and from the taper the great paschal candle, a pillar of wax as tall as a man standing on another man's shoulders, marked with the year and with 5 grains of incense set in it like wounds. The deacon carries the new light into the dark church, halting 3 times to sing, each halt a step higher, and at each halt more tapers are lit from the one flame, so that the light comes into the building the way spring comes into a valley, first one point, then a scattering, then everywhere. And then, standing beside the great candle, the deacon sings the longest and most joyful proclamation of the church's whole year, an unbroken river of praise for this night above all nights. While the candle burns beside him, and the pillars of the nave stand up out of the dark one by one as the light finds them. The font is blessed with the new fire's light dipped into it, the water stirred and breathed upon, and made ready for the christenings of the coming year. And at the Mass that follows, the word that was locked away at the start of the fast is given back. The cantor lifts it alone, once, and the whole choir takes it up, and the organ answers, and the bells above them all begin to swing, and 40 days of plainness open like a gate. Easter morning itself begins before dawn, as everything in this house begins. Before the first office of the day, the abbot and the seniors come with candles to the sepulchre, and the sealed cloth is taken away. And the cross and the reserved bread are raised up out of the little chamber and carried in triumph to the high altar, the choir singing that the Lord is risen, and every bell in the tower rung full out over the dark vale, so that the villages for miles wake to Easter by Abbey bells before there is light in the sky. The church, stripped bare 2 days before, has been clothed overnight, the sacrist and his men working like stagehands between the offices, the best frontals on the altars, the shrine unveiled and blazing with the wax of 100 fresh candles, the copes of cloth of gold brought out of their chests, where they have lain all year in lavender and rue against the moth. At the high mass of Easter Day, the whole house of God is full. Monks in the choir, servants and tenants and guests in the nave, pilgrims who have walked through Holy Week to be at the shrine this morning, and the incense goes up in blue ropes through the new light, and a chant runs bright and quick, and this one morning, is the summit of the year, the point the whole great wheel exists to reach. Everything since midwinter has been climbing toward this, and everything from now to next midwinter will flow gently down from it. And then, because monks are also men, there is dinner. The Easter table is the kindest of the year, and the cellarer has been building toward it all through the fast with the quiet satisfaction of a general who knows his stores. Eggs returned first, blessed in baskets, hundreds of them, hard-boiled and dyed with onion skins, and after the eggs comes flesh meat for the first time since the fast began, veal and bacon and mutton, and wheaten bread whiter than any served in Lent, and the better ale, and for the pittance, a dish of figs and raisins. The community eats in the great refectory beneath the reader's pulpit, and even the reading chosen for Easter week is gentle going, and the older monks in the misericord have their gentler portions, and in the guest hall the hosteler keeps a parallel feast for the pilgrims and travelers, who eat the abbey's meat and drink the abbey's ale and sleep that night within its peace. The rule is not suspended, silence and order hold, but everything has loosened by one notch, and the difference between this table and a Lenten table is a sermon in itself that no one needs to preach. Easter week passes in that same key, day after day of white vestments and full bells, and then the season settles into its long, sweet aftermath, the 50 days of Eastertide, which run from Easter morning to Pentecost and are, by design, the easiest stretch of the monastic year. The fasting rhythm of Lent is gone. There are 2 meals again, dinner at midday and supper in the evening, and the days are long, and the cloister is warm at last. And the joyful word that was given back at the vigil is now everywhere in the liturgy, ending antiphon after antiphon like a wave returning to the same shore. The novices at their lessons in the West Walk are easier to teach in these weeks their master finds, and harder to keep awake in the warm afternoons, and he is old enough and wise enough to know which of those problems matters less. Out on the granges, the sown fields have greened over. The lambs are fat and absurd on the hillsides, the dairies have come into full milk, and the cheese presses are working again, laying down the wheels that will feed the house next winter, for every season here is quietly at work for the ones that follow it. It is in these weeks, too, that the infirmarian reopens his quiet ledger of bleedings deferred through the fast, and the brothers go by turns to the infirmary for their spring sani and their 3 soft days by the fire, coming back to the choir rested and a little sheepish. The scriptorium keeps its best hours of the whole year now, the light strong on the sloped desks from mid-morning to supper, and the antiphona grows by a gathering, and the gold goes on at last. Laid on cushions of pink gesso and burnished with a dog's tooth set in a handle of boxwood until the saints' halos catch the sun that crosses the garth. Nothing needs to be finished quickly here. The book will be used for 200 years, and the man who rules its lines knows it, and rules them well. Late in the 5th week of Eastertide come the rogation days, 3 days of walking and asking. The community and the parish folk together go out in procession across the young corn, the great processional cross ahead, the banners of the saints over the line of walkers, the dragon banner carried by old custom near the rear, and they walk the boundaries of the Abbey's lands as the litanies are sung, calling on the saints name after name in a long patient list that fits itself to the pace. Of walking men, and at the field crosses along the way they halt, and the young crops are blessed, the oats here, the barley there, the beans in flower and full of bees. It is the year's gentlest procession, half prayer and half perambulation, the house asking heaven for a good season and reminding itself, hedge by hedge and stone by stone, exactly where its fields begin and end. The day after the 3rd day of walking is the feast of the Ascension, kept high and bright, and after it the great Paschal candle, which is burned beside the altar through all the offices of the season, a little shorter every week, is put out with due honor, its work almost done. 10 days more, and the season closes. Pentecost falls at the turn of May into June. When the hawthorn is heavy along every hedge of the vale, and the days are at their most generous, and the house keeps the feast in red, the one Sunday of the year when the vestments are the color of flame, in memory of fire that came down and rested on ordinary men and made them brave. The hymn to the Creator Spirit is sung, the church is full again as it was at Easter. And with this feast, the 50 days are complete, and Eastertide is folded away for another year. On the evening of Pentecost, the community comes to Compline as it comes every night of its life, the short last office. The same few psalms the monks have known by heart since boyhood. The same prayer for a quiet night and a perfect end. The light through the west windows is the long gold of an early summer evening. The great candle stands spent and honored in its place. Out on the granges the ewes are folded, and the fields are growing in the dark without anyone's help, and the watchman is walking the wall, and the fish ponds lie still as pewter under the first stars. The season of the great feast is over, the long green stretch of ordinary time lies ahead, and the house, having climbed its mountain and come down again, washes its hands at the cloister trough, draws its hoods up, and goes to bed. The bell falls silent. The year turns on. The green weeks come in quietly, after the last of the great spring festivals. The church settles into what the monks call ordinary time, and ordinary is the right word for it, though not in the way we use it now. It does not mean lesser. It means ordered, counted, kept in its place. The vestments turn green, the color of growing things, and they will stay green for week after week, all through the long light of summer. While outside the Abbey walls the whole countryside leans into its work. There is a deep comfort in this arrangement if you let yourself feel it. The world is at its busiest, and the church answers with its calmest season. Nothing needs to be announced. Nothing is coming. The wheel simply turns, and the Abbey turns with it. And you can rest inside that turning the way a stone rests in the bed of a stream. The days are so long now that the offices have shifted their whole relationship to the light. In winter, Matins is an act of faith performed in the middle of the night, in a darkness so complete that the monks navigate the night stairs by memory and touch. Now, in the weeks after Pentecost, the community rises for Matins and finds the east window already gray, already softening, the first birds already awake in the cloister garth. By the time Lauds ends, the sky above the great tower is the color of watered milk. The monks return to their beds for the short rest the rule allows in summer. And when they rise again for prime, the sun is fully up and the dew is already burning off the garth, that square of grass at the center of the cloister which nobody crosses and everybody looks at, kept like a green jewel in a stone setting. Terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline, 8 times a day the bell gathers them, and 8 times a day the work of the house is set down, mid-gesture, mid-furrow, mid-ledger, and picked up again afterward exactly where it was left. You do not need to remember the names of the hours. They will come round again in their own order, whether you hold them or not, tonight and tomorrow and every day of this long, warm season, and part of the kindness of this place is that nothing in it depends on you. It is in these weeks that the Abbey's attention swings outward toward its lands. A great Benedictine house of this age is not a single building, but a kind of slow constellation. At the center stand the church and cloister. Around them, the mill, the brewhouse, the bakehouse, the barns, the fish ponds, the orchards, the gardens, the gatehouse. And beyond all that, scattered across the countryside for miles in every direction, lie the granges, the Abbey's outlying farms, each one a small, ordered settlement of its own, with its barn and its byre, its sheepfolds and its dovecote, its hall and its chapel. Some are an easy morning's ride away. Some are far enough that a brother sent out on the Abbey's business will sleep there 2 nights before he sees the tower again. In June, all of them are thinking about grass. Haymaking is the first of the summer's 2 great labors, and everything else bends around it. The hay meadows have been closed since early spring, fenced off and let alone, so that the grass has grown tall and heavy, full of clover and sweet vetch waist high in the best low ground by the river. On a dry morning, when the dew has lifted and the weather promises to hold, the mowing begins. Rows of men move through the meadow in a slow diagonal line, each a pace behind and a pace to the side of the man before him, and the scythes go through the standing grass with a long, unhurried, rhythmic hiss, a sound that has not changed in 1,000 years and will not change for centuries yet. The cut grass falls in neat swathes behind them. The smell of it rises at once, green and sweet and faintly sharp, the smell of June itself. And it settles into wool and skin and hair and stays there for days. The mown grass lies in the sun and is turned and turned again with long wooden rakes until it is dried from grass into hay, from a living thing into a keeping thing. Then it is gathered into cocks, those small, round, shouldered heaps that stand in the shorn meadow like a settlement of little houses. And finally it is loaded onto the great 2-wheeled carts, pitched up forkful by forkful until the load stands twice the height of the oxen that pull it, and carried swaying up the lane to the barn. The barn that receives it is worth pausing on, because there are few buildings in England more honest. The Abbey's great barns are built like churches, and not by accident. For the same masons and carpenters raised both. Long aisles of oak posts, tall as ship's masts, hold up a roof of such weight and span that a man standing on the threshing floor and looking up into the dark web of rafters might feel the same small awe he feels under the vault of the Abbey church. The doors are tall enough to admit a loaded cart. Inside, the air is dry and dim and smells of dust and old summers. Through these doors, in the coming weeks, will pass the whole visible wealth of the house, hay, and then corn, load after load after load, and the barn will hold all of it patiently in the dark, the way memory holds a life. The men in the meadows are, for the most part, not the monks themselves. They are the lay brothers and hired men of the granges, and the lay brothers deserve a moment of their own, because their life is one of the quietest arrangements this quiet world ever produced. A lay brother is a man in religion, but not in orders. He has taken vows. He wears a habit plainer than a choir monk's, and he has allowed his beard, which the choir monks are not, so that in any gathering you can tell at a glance which men belong to the choir and which to the fields. He does not sit in the scriptorium, and he is not required to. His prayers are short and few and learned by heart, a handful of paternosters said at set hours wherever he happens to be standing, in a barn, in a fold, at the tail of a plow. His offering is his work. When he mows, the mowing is his psalm. When he carts hay, the carting is his office. The choir monks keep the Opus Dei, the work of God, in the church. The lay brothers keep it in the soil, and the house has always understood that the two are one work held in two pairs of hands. At the granges, the lay brothers have their own dorter to sleep in and their own freighter to eat in, their own small chapel with lime-washed walls and a single lamp, and their days pass in a rhythm that is the Abbey's rhythm made simpler and heavier, rising early, working long, speaking little, sleeping soundly. It is not an easy life, but it is a settled one, and settled is a thing many men in this century would walk a long way to be. While the meadows are falling to the scythe, the buildings along the Abbey's western court are coming to their fullest stretch of the year, and the busiest of them all is the brewhouse. Ale in this England is not a pleasure. It is food. Every soul in the Abbey's care drinks it daily, monk and lay brother, servant and guest, pilgrim and pauper at the gate, because it is nourishing and safe and always has been. And the arithmetic of that, in a house this size, is staggering. The brewhouse works to meet it in a steady, unhurried cycle that never truly ends. Barley from last year's harvest is steeped in water until it swells, then spread across the malting floor in a soft pale carpet and left to sprout, turned twice a day with wide wooden shovels so that it sprouts evenly, the whole floor smelling of damp grain and faint sweetness. When the sprouting has gone just far enough, it is dried over a slow kiln into malt, and the malt is ground. And the ground malt is mashed into great rounds of hot water in tons the size of small boats, and the sweet liquor drawn off is boiled and cooled and set to work with yeast in long wooden troughs, where it mutters gently to itself for days, a low living whisper in the dim warm room, until it has become ale. The best and strongest goes to the abbot's table and the guest hall. The middle sort goes to the monks and the servants. The small ale, thin and mild, goes everywhere else, to the almonry, to the harvest fields, to the boys of the cloister school. In these weeks before harvest, the cellarer has ordered the brewing doubled, because he knows what August will ask of him, and the brewhouse answers with its patient, warm, malty breath, batch after batch after batch. Next door, sharing the same well and much of the same warmth, the bakehouse keeps its own rhythm. The great ovens are fired before prime, and by mid-morning the first bread is coming out on long wooden peels, loaf after loaf, set to cool on racks, and the smell of it drifts across the court and slips into the cloister itself, where it has been distracting novices from their psalters for 200 years. Here, too, there are ranks and degrees, because bread in this world is a map of the world. The finest flour, sifted and sifted again until it is nearly white, becomes the soft rolls of the abbot's lodging and the guest hall. Below that comes the good whole meal of the community, dense and brown and honest. Below that, the coarse loaf, heavy with bran, baked in quantity for the almonry and the gate. The miller at the Abbey mill grinds for all of them, his wheel turning all daylight long on the leat drawn from the river, and the carts move in their own quiet circuit, grain to mill, flour to bakehouse, bread to table, day after day. And nobody involved in any of it is hurrying. It is a system that was old when the oldest monk was a novice, and it works the way a healthy body works, without being watched. Summer opens the roads, and the roads bring people. All through these months, the gatehouse sees a procession that winter never sees. Merchants and masons, carters and clerks, and above all pilgrims come to kneel at the Abbey's shrine. Sometimes in ones and twos, with staff and scrip and hat brim turned down against the sun, sometimes in parties of 20 that come up the road singing. The rule is unambiguous about what happens next, and it is one of the most beautiful sentences ever written into a founding document. All guests who present themselves are to be received as Christ, not questioned first, not sorted first. Received, the brother who carries this duty is the hosteler, the guest master, and in summer his office is a full day's work every day. He keeps the guest hall aired and the beds fresh, the boards scrubbed, the candles trimmed. When guests arrive, he greets them, and water is brought for their hands and feet in the old gesture of welcome. And they are given bread and ale before anyone asks their business. A knight's party and a shoemaker's widow may sleep under the same roof that night, at different ends and at different tables, but under the same roof, fed from the same ovens. In the morning, those who can pay leave an offering, and those who cannot leave a prayer, and the house has always reckoned both to be currency. The stables fill in these months too, and the smell of horse and saddle leather joins the smells of bread and hay in the outer court, and with the travelers comes the news of the world, carried the only way news travels in this century, by mouth along the roads. Word of prices and of weather, of the king's doings and the wool fleet, of roads flooded and bridges mended. All of it arrives at the guest hall table and is weighed there over the ale, and by morning the prior knows whatever the roads know. An abbey looks closed from the outside, a ring of wall with one gate. In truth, it is one of the best informed places in the kingdom, and it gathers news the way it gathers everything else, patiently at its own table without going anywhere at all. The poorest travelers of all do not reach the guest hall. They stop at the gate, and the gate is where the almoner keeps his post. His is the office of the Abbey's open hand. Every day, at the appointed hour, the dole is given out at the gatehouse arch, bread baked for the purpose, small ale, pottage in a great iron cauldron, and whatever the kitchens have set aside. For it is the fixed custom of the house that the broken meats of the abbot's table and the freighter are gathered after every meal and carried down to the gate, so that what the abbey does not finish, the poor do. The almoner knows his regulars, the widows of the town, the old men past labor, the lame and the simple and the luckless, and he knows the faces of the road as well, the walkers and the wanderers, and his book records it all in a steady hand. So many loaves, so many herrings in Lent, so many pairs of shoes given at Christmas, gowns to poor men, pence to prisoners. On this evening, as on every summer evening, the line forms in the shade of the gatehouse, and moves and is fed and disperses along the road in the low golden light. And the almoner bars the wicket and walks back up through the court to vespers with his ledger under his arm. Charity in this house is not a mood. It is a schedule, and there is something profoundly restful in mercy you can set your clock by. Inside the precinct, tucked against the east range where the morning sun reaches it first, lies the infirmary, and beside the infirmary lies its garden, which in high summer may be the loveliest ground in the whole enclosure. The beds are laid out in strict rectangles with grass paths between, and every plant in them has work to do. Sage and rue, fennel and hyssop, betony and vervain, chamomile for sleeplessness, comfrey for bad joints, feverfew for aching heads, mint and horehound, wormwood bitter as regret, and along the south wall, roses. Grown not for show, but for the syrup of their petals, though nobody who walks past them in July could tell you honestly that show has nothing to do with it. The infirmarian moves through this garden in the early morning with his basket and his shears, gathering what the day will need, and the whole warm air around him is a dispensary, lavender and sage and cut grass and rose. His hall stands close by, long and airy, with its own chapel at one end and its own kitchen at the other, and it keeps a gentler version of the Abbey's rule. Here live the monks who are old, and the monks who are ill, and the monks who are simply worn. Men who have kept 40 and 50 winters of night offices, and whose knees and lungs have finally been heard on the subject. In the infirmary the silence is softened, the fire is kept in even in summer, the beds have better mattresses, and the kitchen is permitted to serve meat broth and stronger fare, because the rule, for all its iron, was written by a man who understood weakness and made room for it. Here, too, several times in the year, come the healthy monks in small scheduled parties for the saintly. The periodic bloodletting that this age believes keeps a sedentary man's humors in balance. Whatever we may think of the medicine, the institution around it is pure kindness. A monk who has been bled is excused the night office. He sits in the infirmary for 3 days, eats well, sleeps long, walks in the garden, and is under instruction to do very little else. It is rest, made lawful by Lancet, and the monks look forward to it the way schoolboys look forward to a holiday, quietly and without ever quite saying so. The long light is a gift to the scriptorium as well. In the north walk of the cloister, in the carrels built against the window openings, the writing goes on all summer, and these are the best months for it. When a man can work from prime to vespers without a candle, and the ink dries almost as fast as it is laid down. The tools of the work are all made within a day's reach of where it is done. The parchment is the skin of the Abbey's own calves and sheep, limed and scraped and stretched and scraped again until it is pale and taut and takes ink like nothing else ever devised. The ink is oak gall and iron salts and gum, brewed black and faintly shining. The pens are goose quills, cut and recut with a small sharp knife that gave its name to every penknife since. The copyist rules his page with a dry point, pricks the margins, and settles into the slow discipline of the letter forms word by word, line by line, his lips perhaps moving faintly. And what he is copying may be a gospel, or a psalter, or a chronicle of the house, or the rent roll of a distant manor. because a great abbey runs on writing the way a mill runs on water, and heaven and the harvest are recorded by the same hands. There is no signature at the bottom of the page. There almost never is. The work is offered the way the hay is offered, anonymously. Into the common store of the house, and the man who made it goes to vespers with ink on his fingers and no other monument, and does not appear to mind. The sacrist, meanwhile, keeps the church itself, and summer sets him his own tasks. His is the care of everything the sanctuary holds, the vessels and the vestments, the linen and the lamps, the bells and their ropes, and above all the wax. For the abbey burns candles the way it burns firewood, and the sacrist's store-room smells of honey all year long. The abbey keeps its own hives for this among the orchard trees, and buys wax besides, and through these months the sacrist and his assistants are rendering and molding and trimming, laying up the great candles for the feasts ahead. In the long afternoons the church stands mostly empty between offices, vast and cool while the court outside bakes, its pillars rising into shadow, dust turning slowly in the colored light from the windows, and a single lamp burning steadily above the high altar, as it burns all day and all night, all year, every year. A small, unhurried flame that is never allowed to go out and never asked to do anything but stay lit. If you can hold one image of this whole summer in your mind as you drift, let it be that one. Everything else in this story is moving. That flame is not. There are smaller stewardships, too, each with its own brother and its own ledger. The fish ponds lie in a chain below the orchard, stew ponds dug and dammed generations ago, where brame and pike and eels grow fat against the fast days that fill nearly half the calendar, and the pond keeper walks the banks in the warm evenings, watching the water dimple, mending a sluice, netting out what Friday will require. The dovecote stands round and white as a salt cellar, murmuring with several hundred birds. The orchard ripens slowly through the season, apples and pears and plums swelling in the leaves, and the bees work their rows of woven skeps as the clover comes and goes. None of these things needs anything from you. They are simply going on, all at once, all within one ring of wall. The water and the birds and the fruit and the bees, the way a body's organs go on, each at its own pace, adding up quietly to a life. At the 1st of August, the wheel clicks forward again. The day is called Lammas, Loaf Mass, and it is one of the oldest festivals in England, older than most of the stones of the Abbey. The first wheat of the new harvest, cut early from the forwardest field, is threshed at once, ground at once, and baked into loaves, and the loaves are carried into the church and blessed at the altar, and with that small ceremony the old year of grain is formally over, and the new one has begun. It is a modest feast, as feasts go, no processions to speak of, but no one in this world is unmoved by it, because everyone in this world knows precisely what those loaves mean. The barns are at their emptiest. The new harvest is standing in the fields, made but not yet gathered, and everything now depends on weather and labor and time. The blessing at the altar is the whole community saying, in effect, that the matter is in better hands than theirs, and then going out to work as though it were entirely in their own, which is, when you think about it, the Abbey's whole philosophy in a single August morning. And then the harvest itself, the second and greatest labor of the summer, the weeks for which this entire year has been a preparation. Across every grange the wheat and rye and barley and oats come ripe in their turn, and from Lammas to early September the Abbey's world narrows to the fields. Every man who can be spared is out, lay brothers and hired harvesters, servants of the granges and men taken on for the season, and the long lines move down the standing corn with sickle and scythe. And behind them the binders gather the cut corn into sheaves, and the sheaves are set up in stooks, little leaning tents of grain standing in rows across the stubble to finish drying in the sun. The days are long and hot and dusty, and the cellarer's foresight in the brewhouse is now explained. For the harvest ale goes out to the fields in barrels on a cart, and bread and cheese with it, and the reapers eat sitting in the shade of the hedge at noon with the ease of men who know they have earned it. The choir monks keep the hours in the church as always, and the psalms go up over the shorn fields, and there are days at the height of it when the line between the two kinds of work grows thin enough to see through, the reapers gathering in the wheat, the singers gathering in the day, both harvests going into the same barn in the end. When the carts roll in at last, loaded high and creaking. Through the great doors of the barns at the granges and the greater barn at the Abbey itself, the sheaves are stacked to the rafters in golden walls, and the year's bread is, for the first time, actually indoors. The threshing will not happen now. Threshing is winter's work, flail work for the cold months, and the grain will keep perfectly well in the sheaf until then. What matters is that it is in, and after the carts, by ancient and carefully kept custom, come the gleaners, for the almoner sees to it that the poor of the gate have their turn in the Abbey stubble, gathering the dropped and scattered ears by hand into aprons and bags, and the fields are picked as clean by charity as they were by labor, and nothing at all is wasted. Which is this house's idea of holiness as much as anything sung in choir. In the middle of August, right in the throat of the harvest, comes the feast of the Assumption of Our Lady, the great summer festival of the Mother of God, and the Abbey downs its tools and turns to glory for a day. The church is dressed. The best copes come out of the sacrist's presses, gold thread and blue silk. Every altar has its candles, the great bells ring over the stubble fields, and the monks sing the ladies' own antiphons in a church filled with the scent of beeswax and incense and the particular dusty sweetness of high summer. It is a rest taken at the moment of greatest labor, placed there, one suspects, by a calendar that understood men. And the next morning the sickles are taken up again, with something restored that bread alone does not restore. The kitchens, too, begin their quiet turn from serving the season to storing it. The kitchener and his undercooks are salting and smoking and drying, laying down herrings in barrels against the fast to come, potting and pickling, hanging herbs from the rafters in pale dusty bundles. And the long larder off the great kitchen fills shelf by shelf with the smell of brine and wood smoke and thyme. Nothing about it is urgent. It is simply the other half of harvest, the indoor half, the part done standing at a bench instead of stooping in a field, and it goes on placidly behind the scenes of everything else. September comes in softer. The light turns from white to gold, the mornings carry the first faint cool edge, and the Abbey's attention moves from the corn to the trees. The orchard is picked, ladder by ladder, basket by basket, the apples laid in single layers on the straw of the apple loft, where they will scent that whole range of buildings until spring, the cider fruit carried to the press. The plums gone already into the kitchen's crocks. The last honey is taken, and the wax laid up for the sacrist. The fish ponds are looked over, and their sluices mended before the rains. The wool clip of the summer's shearing, sacked and weighed in the wool house, stands ready for the merchants, for the Abbey sheep walks produce wool that travels farther than any monk ever will. Sold by contract to buyers who ship it to the weaving towns across the sea, and the price of it underwrites a surprising share of everything you have heard tonight. The lead on the roofs, the glass in the windows, the books in the presses. Fleece by fleece, quietly, the sheep have been paying for the sanctuary all along. And so the season comes down at the 29th of September to Michaelmas, the feast of St. Michael and all the angels, and to the Abbey's other great reckoning, the one made not in the church, but in the chequer. Michaelmas is the hinge of the administrative year, the day the accounts are rendered, and in the days around it, the obedientiaries come one by one to the exchequer room with their rolls and their tallies, the cellarer with the largest accounting in the house, the sacrist with his wax and his offerings, the almoner with his doles, the infirmarian, the hosteler, the master of the works. Each of them answering for a year of his office, receipts against expenses, item by item, in the dry Latin of accounts. The reeves and bailiffs of the granges ride in with the manor rolls, the rents come in coin and in kind. The auditors sit at the checkered cloth that gives the room its name, moving their counters column by column, and slowly, roll by roll. The whole vast, quiet machinery you have been listening to all this hour is reduced to entries on parchment, so much brewed, so much baked, so much given at the gate, so much gathered into the barns, and the sum of it all, this year as most years, is enough. That is all the Abbey ever asks of a year, not triumph. Enough on Michaelmas Day itself the Church keeps the feast of the great Archangel. And the accounts wait on the glory, not the other way round. And in the evening, when Vespers is sung, and the light is going early for the first time, the cellarer might stand a moment in the door of the great barn before Compline, as the cool comes down, and the rooks go home over the tower, and look at what the summer has become, hay to the rafters at one end, and corn to the rafters at the other. The granaries filled, the loft floored with apples, the cellars stacked, the wool sold, the rolls cast and balanced, the whole golden season folded up and stored against the dark half of the year the way linen is folded into a press. Every task you have heard tonight is finished or safely handed on. Nothing is owed. Nothing is missing. The bell rings for Compline unhurried, and the brothers go in, and the day's last psalms rise in the darkening church, and the Abbey, fed and counted and full, settles toward the turning of the year like a great ship riding at anchor, and you can settle with it. There is nothing here to hold. It is all gathered in. By Michaelmas, the house is ready. That is the quiet fact that sits over everything now, like the lid on a full chest. The granaries by the great court are shut and barred, and behind their doors the grain lies heaped in the dark, dry and clean, enough to carry 200 mouths through to the green months. The cellars under the freighter hold their barrels in long, patient rows. The fruit loft smells of apples laid out on straw, each one turned so that it touches no neighbor, because an apple that touches another apple in October is an apple that spoils by Candlemas, and the fruiterer knows this the way he knows his psalms. The house is provisioned, and a provisioned house in the year of grace, 1350, is a calm house. Whatever the winter intends, the Abbey has already answered it. All through the quarter the Abbey's granges have been sending in their renders, and now the reckoning is made. Rents from the Abbey's tenants, some paid in silver pennies, counted out in little heaps, some paid in kind, in geese and hens and eggs and honey, and one ancient rent, older than any man's memory of it, paid every Michaelmas in eels from the mill stream, a fixed number of eels spelled out in a charter that the sacrist keeps in a chest with 3 locks. Nobody now remembers why eels. The rent is paid in eels because it has always been paid in eels. And there is a deep comfort in that, the comfort of a thing that continues because it continues. There is no drama in a Michaelmas audit when the year has been sound. There is only the soft click of counters and the smell of ink and tallow, and outside the window the first gray rain of autumn moving across the garth. You do not need to remember any of this. The cellarer remembers it for you. That is what he is for, and his roles will still balance whether you follow them or not. So let the numbers drift past you like the rain. October settles over the Abbey like a blanket drawn slowly up. The light changes first. All summer the cloister has been a bright square. The garth grass green and the arcades full of sun, and now the sun comes in low and level, striping the walk with long bars of pale gold that travel through the morning and are gone by mid-afternoon. The dew lies heavy on the garth until nearly dinner time. The first frosts silver it, and the brothers coming from prime leave dark footprints across the white, a line of them, always the same line. Because monks walk where monks have always walked. The great elms beyond the precinct wall let down their leaves, a few at a time, then all at once, and the lay brothers sweep them from the drains and the gutters. Because a blocked drain in October is a flooded cellar in January, and the Abbey thinks in those long, careful arcs about everything. The fish ponds are seen to now, before the hard weather. The Abbey keeps its stew ponds in a chain along the little valley below the orchard, one feeding into the next, and in the low sun of an October morning the lay brothers wade the margins with long nets while the water is let down slowly through the sluice. Bream and pike and tench come up shining out of the gray water, and the eels twist in the folds of the nets like ribbons of dark silk. The best fish are carried up in wet barrels to the small inner stew beside the kitchen, where the cook can reach them at an hour's notice through the winter, for the Abbey eats fish on so many days of the year that a full stew pond is as needful as a full granary. The rest are returned to the deeper water to sleep out the winter in the mud. The men work quietly, thigh deep, their breath showing, and a heron watches them from the far bank with the fixed patience of his kind, and nobody hurries, because fish are not hurried, and neither is anything else here. The woodyard has its own October ceremony, quieter even than the ponds. All year the Abbey's coppices have been giving up their poles and their cordwood in rotation, each stand cut in its turn and left to grow again, 7 winters and back to the axe, a harvest that never fails, because it is never taken twice from the same place. Now the last carts come creaking in from the granges loaded high, and the lay brothers stack the logs in long walls under the open sheds. But ends out, split faces weathering, this year's cutting on one side of the yard and last year's, silver and dry and ready, on the other. Faggots for the ovens are bound and piled to the eaves, charcoal for the smith and for the little chafing dishes of the church comes in by the sack and is stored dry. A man can read the yard at a glance the way the cellarer reads his rolls. And what it says in October is the only thing anyone wants it to say, which is enough and to spare. Through all of this, the daily round of the house goes on unchanged, and that is the deepest truth of the place, the one the seasons only decorate. Matins in the dark, lauds at first light, prime and tercy in the morning mass, sexton none, vespers as the light fails, compline in the last of it. The offices do not shorten, because the days do. If anything they grow, for the nights of winter are the great nights of the choir. and the Abbey was built for them. The brewhouse keeps its own liturgy alongside, mash tun and copper and cooling trough, and on brewing days the smell of malt lies over the great court like something you could lean against, warm and sweet and faintly like bread. The bakehouse answers it every morning. Between them they are the two warm hearts of the outer court, and men find reasons to pass by their doors in October and stand a moment in the breath of the ovens, and then go on to their work. Then comes November, and November opens with the dead. The first day of the month is the Feast of All Saints, and it is one of the golden days of the year. Every altar in the great church is lit. The shrine behind the high altar is uncovered, the relics in their gilded cases catching the candle flames, and the choir sings the office of the day with the full voice of the house, every stall filled. The sound climbing up into the dark of the roof and hanging there. It is a feast of light in the first true dark of the year, and it is placed there on purpose, the way a lamp is placed in a window. And when it has burned all day like a lamp, the evening turns, and the bells begin to toll instead of ring, and the house passes into the vigil of All Souls, the day of the remembering of the dead. The Abbey does not think of its dead as gone. That must be understood gently, because it is the key to the whole of November. A monk who dies here is buried in the monks' cemetery on the east side of the church, in a plain grave among plain graves, low green mounds under a few old crosses, and from that day he is spoken of as one still belonging to the community. A brother who has moved to another dormitory no further away than that. His name is written in the book of the dead, and on the anniversary of his death, every year, forever, that name is read aloud in chapter, and the community prays for him by name. Men who never saw his face praying for him as easily as for a brother who sat beside them at supper. There are names in the book that have been read out every year for 200 years. The reader does not stumble on them. They are as familiar as the Psalms, and like the Psalms, they belong to everyone and to no one. On the eve of All Souls, the community sings the Vespers of the Dead, the office men call placebo from its first word, slow and dark and unspeakably tender. And at matins in the deep night they sing the dirige, from which the world outside the wall takes its word for a funeral song. All the next day the bells toll at intervals, a single bell, unhurried, and the sound rolls out over the precinct wall and across the fields, and in the villages on the Abbey's lands the people hear it and stop a moment in their doorways, because everyone has dead. And the bell is tolling for all of them at once. At the great gate the almoner keeps open table for the poor of the district, loaves and herring and small silver given out for the souls of the departed, so that on the day of the dead it is the living poor who are fed, which is how the Abbey understands the arithmetic of heaven. In the freighter, the monks themselves are served a pittance, a small extra dish beside the common fare, given by an old endowment in memory of an abbot dead these many generations, who wish to be remembered not with a monument, but with a dish of figs on the day of the dead, every year at this table. And so he is. That is a kind of monument the frost cannot touch. The graves lie quiet under the November mist while all this goes on above them, and the low mounds are furred with the last of the year's grass, and rooks walk about between the crosses with their hands behind their backs like old men, and there is nothing in the whole picture to be afraid of. The Abbey has made friends with the one thing most of the world cannot look at. It looks at it every day, in the office and in chapter and in the book of names, and by looking has worn it smooth the way a door sill is worn smooth, until death itself has become one more thing the house does calmly, in season, according to custom. You may let your own shoulders come down now. Nothing in this month will startle you. It is only the house, going about its oldest work. After the dead come the beasts, for the middle of November brings Martinmas, and Martinmas is the slaughter month made feast. All through the autumn the Abbey swine have been out in the oak woods under the care of the swineherds, fattening on acorns and beech mast, in the drifts of fallen leaves, and now they are brought in, unhurried, along the muddy droves. The granges send down the oxen that are past their working strength, and a portion of the sheep that cannot be carried through the winter on the hay there is. It is a reckoning as old as the fields themselves. The hay barns will feed so many mouths through the dark months, and no more, and so the surplus is rendered now into the larder, and nothing about it is done in cruelty, and nothing about it is wasted, and the men who do the work do it quickly and with skill, in the slaughter yard behind the kitchen, early, in the cold, and it is over soon. And then begins the long, calm craft that is the real substance of the season, which is the keeping of meat. The larder in the days after Martinmas is the busiest room in the Abbey. The great salting troughs are set out, hollowed trunks of elm as long as a man, and the salt is brought from the store in coarse gray blocks, sea salt from the salterns of the coast, broken and ground on the spot. The joints are laid in the troughs and buried in salt, turned and rubbed and turned again over days, the brine drawn out and renewed, and the larderer moves along the row, testing each piece with his thumb, and he can tell by the feel of it, by the firmness under the rind, whether the salt has gone to the bone. Flitches of bacon are rubbed dry and carried to the smoke loft above the kitchen fire, where they hang in the slow oak smoke in ranked rows, darkening week by week until they are the color of church oak. And a man who climbs to that loft in January will stand a moment in the brown gloom among them, in that dense, sweet reek, and feel wealth around him, actual wealth, the winter's eating hung up in order overhead. Barrels of salted beef are headed up and rolled to the cellar and stood on their ends in the coolest corner, each barrel chalked by the cellarer's clerk. Tallow is rendered in the yard coppers and run into molds for the winter's candles, for the church burns wax from the Abbey's own hives, but the kitchen and the offices burn tallow, and a long winter is measured in candle ends. The hides go to the tanner, the horn goes to the horner. The bristles are kept for brushes and the fat for greasing boots and cart axles, and when the season's work is done and the larderer bars his door at Compline, the Abbey is carrying its winter the way a ship carries its stores, stowed, lashed, accounted for, riding low and steady in the water. The cold that fastens down after Martinmas changes the shape of the day for every soul in the precinct. Fires in a monastery are few and lawful in their places. The kitchen has its great fire, which never quite dies. The infirmary has its own, for the sick must be kept warm as a matter of charity and of medicine both. And for the rest of the community there is one room and one fire. The warming house on the cloister's south range, the calefactory, and by ancient custom its fire is kindled at the feast of All Saints, and will be kept in day upon day until Easter says it may go out. It is a plain room with a wide hearth, and it burns the Abbey's own wood, cut 2 winters ago and stacked to dry with the same forethought that governs everything else here. Between the offices the brothers may come in and stand about the hearth a while and let the heat soak into their hands, and there is little talking, because the rule loves silence, but there is the fire's own talking, the settle and sigh of the logs. And there is a particular contentment in a room of silent men and one loud fire that perhaps exists nowhere else in the world. The old monks are given the bench nearest the hearth. Nobody assigned it to them. Benches find their way to the old in a well-ordered house, the way water finds a level. The infirmary in these months is a small, warm kingdom of its own. The infirmarian has spent his autumn well, and from the beams of his hall hang the dried herbs of the physic garden in paper bunches, fennel and horehound and hyssop, mint and rue and wormwood, and on his shelves stand the syrups he boiled in September against the coughs he knew November would bring, honey thick, smelling faintly of the garden they grew in. The brothers come to him in their turns through the winter for the sene, the letting of blood which the age holds needful for health, and which the community has made into something very like a small holiday. A monk who has been bled is excused the night office. He stays in the infirmary some days, sits by the infirmarian's fire, eats a little better than the freighter allows. Meat broth and soft bread, sleeps, mends, and goes back to his stall, rested in body and soul. The wisest customs are the ones that have found a way to fold kindness inside necessity, and monastic life is stitched through with them. Small mercies with old names, threaded quietly along the year where the strain would otherwise tell. And now the days close down toward their shortest, and the Abbey turns to the work that the dark season keeps for its own. And the scriptorium fills. Along one walk of the cloister, the walk that catches what low sun there is, stand the carols, little wooden stalls, each with its sloped desk, each with its window of thick greenish glass, and in them the writing brothers sit wrapped in their cowls, with their inkhorns at their elbows, and the world shrunk to the width of a page. The precentor gives out the work. One brother is far into a psalter that was begun before the youngest novice in the house was born. Another copies a book of the Gospels, another a volume of the Fathers lent from a sister house and to be returned, copied with courtesies by summer. The parchment is the Abbey's own, from the skins of its own flocks, scraped and pounced and cut to size in the little room where such work is done. And the quills are from the Abbey's geese, and the black ink is made in the precinct to a recipe older than the church that stands over it, oak gall and iron and gum, mixed in small batches and better in the cold, the scribes say, though nobody can say why. Each page is pricked along its margins and ruled faint before a word is written, so that the words when they come will stand in ranks as even as a choir. And then the slow letters begin, one by one, black and upright, the quill making its small, dry whisper, which is the only voice in the room. In the pit of the year the light fails by mid-afternoon, and vespers is sung in dusk, and here the Abbey makes one of its rare and careful exceptions. For flame and parchment are old enemies, and no open candle wanders these desks. But in the deepest weeks a few lanterns of scraped horn are lit and set in their appointed places, each one shielded, each one watched, the sacrist himself walking the walk at intervals like a man tending something holy. And inside the horn panes the wax candles burn with a small buttery glow, and the light comes down on the page soft and yellow as honey. A capital letter half done lies in that pool of light, its reds laid on, its blue drying, waiting for the leaf of gold that the illuminator will float onto the sized ground tomorrow, breathing on it first, because gold leaf answers to the warmth of a man's breath and to almost nothing else. The scribe works until the signal for the office and then lays down the quill mid-word, without regret, because the word will wait. These books are not hurried. Some of the men bent in these stalls will not live to see their book finished, and they know it, and it does not grieve them. The book was going on before them and will go on after them, like the Psalms, like the house itself. And their part is only the letters that fall in their own years, made as well as they can be made. There may be no calmer work in all the world than this, black letters in yellow lantern light, in silence, in winter, inside 3 feet of stone. Outside, the last of November is going down into mist and early dark. The feast of St. Catherine passes. And then the feast of St. Andrew at the month's very end. And St. Andrew is the hinge of hinges, for the church counts its new year from the Sunday nearest his day. And that Sunday is Advent. And Advent is where every year both ends and begins. The Kitchener has already turned his books to the fasting season, for Advent is kept lean, fish and pottage, and the plain loaf. The rich stores locked away to wait for Christmas, and there is a rightness in that ordering that even the body understands. The quiet weeks first, the feast at the end of them, the larder itself keeping the church's calendar. The novice master walks his novices round the cloister in the gray afternoons, teaching them the shape of the season that is coming, the first of all seasons. The waiting season. The house grows, if it is possible, quieter still. Winter and the rule have the same instincts. Both draw inward, both bank their fires, both keep their treasures dark and safe until the appointed day. The guest hall feels the season too. Through the warm months it was seldom still, pilgrims on the road to the great shrines, merchants about the wool, travelers of every degree taking the Abbey's roof for a night, as the custom of the country allows, but the roads of December discourage all but the determined, and the hostelers' hall grows quiet. Those who do come in now, come in cold, and the house receives them the more warmly for it, for the rule says that every guest is to be welcomed as the Lord himself, and a rule like that shows its full meaning best on a bitter night. There is always a fire for them, and a trestle laid, and a candle to bed. Some evenings the hall holds one solitary traveler eating his pottage in a silence he slowly stops minding. With the Abbey's own quiet settling over him like a second cloak, and more than one such guest, down the years, has ridden away in the morning and found the noise of the world strangely loud for a day or two after. On the last Saturday of the old year, the sacrist and his men make the church ready. The lamps are trimmed and filled through the afternoon, the great candles renewed in their stands. The altars vested in the deep sombre colors of the season, and on the huge lectern in the middle of the choir the antiphoner is opened, not part way, but to its first page. There is a thing worth seeing on that page, if you could stand at the lectern in the failing light and look. It is the most worn page in the book. Its lower corner is soft as cloth and browned by 2 centuries of thumbs. Because every year of all those years, the year is begun here, at this page, with these opening notes, and every cantor of the house, back beyond memory, has set his hand exactly where the cantor will set his hand tonight. The whole turning wheel of everything you have heard, the plowing and the lambing, the shearing and the harvest, the salting and the smoke. The dead in their quiet rows and the gold drying on the vellum, all of it comes round at last to the corner of one page, worn soft, waiting in an empty church. And then it is evening, the eve of Advent Sunday, and the bell rings for first vespers of the new year. It is quite dark already. Outside, the first hard frost of the winter is settling on the roofs of the granaries and the dorter, on the orchard grass, on the low mounds in the monks' cemetery, wakening them all alike. The community comes down the night stairs and through the cloister door in single file, oldest to youngest, hoods up against the cold, and their sandals on the stones make the sound that this building has heard every evening for 300 years, a sound like slow, soft rain. The church receives them one by one into a darkness that is not empty but banked, like the fire in the warming house, a few lamps burning steady at the shrine and in the choir, the piers rising away from the light into a roof that cannot be seen but can be felt, the way you feel a hill in the dark. Each monk finds his stall by long habit without looking and stands in his place. And stillness comes down over the choir the way the frost is coming down outside, evenly, gently, everywhere at once. Then the cantor gives out the first antiphon of Advent, of the year, of everything, and the two sides of the choir take it up between them, verse and answer, old men's voices and young men's together, unhurried in the dark. And the new year begins exactly as the old one ended, in singing, in this same place, at this same hour. Nothing is concluded, because nothing here concludes. The wheel has simply come round, as it came round last year, as it will come round when every man now singing lies out under the east wall with his name in the book, and other voices not yet born stand in these stalls and sing these notes off this same worn page. Matins will come again in the deep of this very night. The cellarer's rolls will open on a new year in the checker. The fire is kept in. The stores are sound. The house is safe, and the singing goes on, rising and falling like slow breathing, and there is nothing further to wait for and nothing left undone. Let it grow far away now. Stay, if you like, in the warm dark at the back of the church, past the last lamp, where the voices reach you softened by all that stone, and let the sound blur, and let the words go. You do not need to follow the Psalms to be kept by them. If you drift off in the middle of the singing, that is not a discourtesy here. It is the oldest compliment this house understands, for half its work down all its centuries has been sung over sleepers, over the sick in the infirmary, over the guests in the hall, over the villages beyond the wall, all the sleeping country folded in the sound of it. And you are only one more, and you are welcome, and all of it in its way is still there. The abbeys of England stand yet in their green valleys, some whole, some open to the sky, their arches over quiet grass, their fish ponds gone to reeds, their stones warm in summer and frosted on nights like this one, and the same December dark comes down over them now that came down over the singing you have been hearing. And the same frost whitens the same old walls. Long after the last voice fell silent, the places themselves kept the stillness, and they keep it tonight, out there in the fields, while you lie here in the warm. None of it needs anything from you. It has been looked after. Everything, tonight, has been looked after. If these quiet hours in the old abbey have helped you toward rest, you might. Some other evening, let the channel know with a like, or stay with us by subscribing, but only if you truly enjoyed the journey, and only once you have slept, for nothing on this channel matters half so much as the sleep it is made for, though it is true that it genuinely does help this small hearth of ours to keep its fire in. And if you would like to do one small kind thing tonight, leave your location and your local time in the comments below, so that all of us drifting off across the world can see one another's lamps going out one by one, like the lamps of the Abbey at Compline. Perhaps tell us, too, which corner of history you would like to sleep inside next. and we will walk there together some other night. The frost is thickening on the granary roofs, the lamps are low, the singing is ended, and the monks have gone up the night stairs to their beds, and the great church stands dark and full and utterly at peace, keeping the ear, keeping the silence, keeping you. There is nothing more to listen for. Close your eyes. Good night and sweet dreams.